They say you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. But what happens when your family chooses to get rid of you permanently? This story begins at 40,000 feet, with a silver-haired man in seat 12A, a one-way ticket to a country he's never seen, and a son who just walked out of the terminal without looking back. What the son didn't plan for was the pilot. Because during a routine pre-flight check, the captain saw a face he recognized from a missing person alert just that morning, and he refused to take off. The man's name was Arthur Bell, 63 years old, a retired history teacher from Ohio. His son David had told him this was a bucket list trip, a surprise gift, but the ticket in Arthur's hand was one way to Manila, and his passport held a visitor's visa good for only 1 month. He was being erased. This is the story of a betrayal so calculated, it was almost perfect. Almost, because it all hinged on one person not paying attention. And in seat 12A, Arthur Bell was about to become the one person everyone noticed. To understand how you abandon your own father, you first have to understand what he represents. Arthur Bell wasn't just a parent, he was a living archive. He remembered every birthday, every teacher's name, the exact spot in the backyard where David scraped his knee learning to ride a bike. For 41 years, Arthur taught American history at McKinley High. He lived in the same 3-bedroom house in Dayton for 38 of them. His world was small, predictable, built on routines and loyalty. His wife, Carol, passed away from early-onset Alzheimer's 7 years ago. Arthur cared for her at home until the very end, draining their modest savings on in-home nurses. When she died, he was left with the house, a teacher's pension, and a son who lived 2,000 miles away in San Francisco. David Bell was an only child. He moved to California after college, chasing the tech boom. He was smart, ambitious, but perpetually on the edge of what he could afford. By his mid-30s, David was managing a team at a mid-level startup, carrying a mortgage on a condo whose value had plateaued, and supporting a lifestyle that constantly outpaced his salary. Arthur knew some of this. The calls home became less frequent, more strained. When they did talk, it was about David's stress, his frustrations. Arthur would listen, then gently offer the only thing he had left, advice. Simplify, David. Come home, the house is paid for. But to David, Dayton wasn't a solution. It was a symbol of everything he was trying to outrun. The first real sign something was wrong came 18 months before the ticket to Manila. Arthur was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. It wasn't dementia, not yet, but his memory had begun to develop soft edges. He'd forget appointments, repeat stories. His doctor was clear. He could live independently, but he shouldn't be alone all the time. He suggested Arthur consider a lifestyle community, a place with support. When Arthur told David, the reaction was silence, then a hurried, "We'll figure it out, Dad, don't worry." What David figured out was a spreadsheet. He became, almost overnight, intensely involved in Arthur's finances. He got power of attorney, citing the need to help streamline things. He had Arthur's mail forwarded to a P.O. box in California. He explained it was easier for him to manage bills online. Arthur, trusting and increasingly unsure of his own judgment, agreed. He missed the quiet shift in the language David used. Your assets became our situation. The house became the liability. Then 6 months ago, David proposed the idea. He called it the Grand Reset. "Dad," he said, his voice bright with fabricated excitement, "you've spent your whole life in Ohio. You deserve an adventure, a real one. I've found this incredible, affordable senior living resort in the Philippines. It's a community full of expats. The weather is perfect, the care is top-notch, and the cost is a fraction of what you'd pay here. We could sell the house, bank the profit, and you'd live like a king." Arthur was hesitant. It sounded drastic, but David was persistent. He sent brochures, links to glowing testimonials. He framed it as a gift, the ultimate retirement. "I want to do this for you, Dad, for everything you did for me." The pressure was subtle but constant. David began talking about the strain of worrying from so far away. He mentioned, just in passing, how much time and money he was spending managing Arthur's affairs from California. The guilt, expertly applied, began to work. Arthur's resistance softened. He started to see his own desire to stay as a burden. In February, David flew to Dayton. He spent a week packing up the house himself. He was efficient, methodical. Arthur's life was sorted into 3 piles: a small shipment of personal items to be sent abroad, A larger pile for storage David insisted was temporary, and a heap for donation. Arthur's favorite armchair, Carol's china cabinet, all donated. David said it was too expensive to ship. He sold the house in March. The proceeds, just over $270,000, were wired to a new joint account. The travel plans were made with dizzying speed. David handled everything. The visa application for the Philippines, the medical checkup, the flight booking. He told Arthur it was a one-year renewable retirement visa. The paperwork was all in English, but dense with legal terminology. Arthur signed where David pointed. The flight was booked for a Tuesday in May. David said he'd fly to Ohio, accompany Arthur to the connecting airport in Los Angeles, and see him off on the final leg to Manila. "It'll be an adventure," David said again, squeezing his father's shoulder. The morning of the flight, Arthur felt a deep, unshakable dread. He stood in his now empty bedroom, the walls bare, and felt like a ghost in his own life. At the airport in Dayton, David was all business, cheerful but in a way that didn't reach his eyes. He checked Arthur's bag, a single suitcase. He handled the passport and boarding passes. He walked Arthur to the security line. "This is it, Dad, your new chapter." Arthur hugged him tight. David's hug was brief, patting his back twice. "I'll call as soon as you land," Arthur said. "Of course," David replied. He didn't say he loved him. He just smiled and waved as Arthur walked through the security checkpoint. The layover in Los Angeles was 3 hours. Arthur sat at the gate for Philippine Airlines Flight 107. He tried calling David twice. Both calls went straight to voicemail. He texted, "At the gate, all good." No reply. He pushed the anxiety down. David was probably busy or in a meeting. The boarding call came. Arthur handed his boarding pass to the gate agent. She scanned it, looked at her screen, then back at him. A faint frown. "Mr. Bell, one moment." She typed something, waited. Then her expression cleared. "Okay, you're all set. Have a pleasant flight." That moment, that tiny hesitation, was the first crack in David's plan, but Arthur didn't know it yet. He found seat 12A, a window seat near the front of the economy cabin. He stored his carry-on, buckled his seatbelt, and looked out at the tarmac. He felt a profound loneliness, but also a flicker of resolve. He would make this work. He would call David from Manila. Everything would be okay. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Mark Rinaldi began his pre-flight rituals. He reviewed the passenger manifest, noting a few passengers with special service requests. His first officer mentioned they were waiting on a final cargo document. To pass the time, Captain Rinaldi scrolled through his phone, checking the news headlines he'd missed. A local California news alert caught his eye, a silver alert for a missing Atrisk senior from Ohio, last believed to be traveling to the West Coast. The face in the photo was grainy but familiar. He looked at it again, then glanced at the printed manifest on his clipboard. At seat 12A, the name Bell Arthur. The age matched, and the face, he'd just seen that face at the gate. A distinguished, confused-looking man in a wrinkled blazer. The alert said the family believed he may be attempting to travel abroad and that he was easily confused. Captain Rinaldi felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. He turned to his first officer. "We're not going anywhere. Call operations, tell them to hold the bridge, and get airport police on the line. Now." Inside the cabin, the delay was just an annoyance at first. A murmur of frustration as the captain announced a slight hold for a technical check. Arthur Bell, staring out at the stationary jet bridge, felt his anxiety tighten another notch. Then he saw them. 2 uniformed police officers, followed by a man in a suit from airport operations, and finally, Captain Rinaldi himself, walking purposefully down the aisle. They stopped at row 12. All the air left Arthur's lungs. The captain knelt down, his voice low and calm. "Mr. Bell, I'm Captain Rinaldi. We need to have a word with you off the aircraft. Could you please come with us?" Arthur's mind scrambled. Had he done something wrong? Forgotten something? Is there a problem with my passport? The captain's expression was unreadable, professional. "We just need to clarify some details, sir, for your safety." The word safety hung in the air. Arthur unbuckled his seatbelt with trembling hands, gathered his coat, and was escorted off the plane past a cabin of staring passengers. They took him to a private office in the terminal, not a police station. This was deliberate. Airport police deal with interdictions differently. Their goal is resolution, not immediate arrest. In the room were the 2 officers, the operations manager and Captain Rinaldi. They offered Arthur water. He refused. The senior officer, a woman named Sergeant Vega, began. "Mr. Bell, we've received some information that causes us concern about your travel. Can you tell us where you're going today?" Manila, Arthur said, his voice thin. To a retirement resort. My son arranged it. And is your son aware you're traveling today? Of course, he bought the ticket. He was just with me in Dayton. Sergeant Vega nodded slowly. When was the last time you spoke to him? Arthur checked his phone. No calls, no texts. At the Dayton airport, before security. And has he responded to any messages since? Arthur's silence was answer enough. Sergeant Vega exchanged a look with the captain. Mr. Bell, earlier today, a missing person report was filed with the San Francisco Police Department. It lists you as the missing person. It states you are cognitively impaired, that you wandered away from your family's care in California, and that you may be attempting to travel internationally, which would be dangerous given your condition. Arthur stared at her. The words landed like physical blows. Cognitively impaired, wandered away. A cold, sick understanding began to dawn. That's not true. I don't live in California. I live in Ohio. I sold my house. My son has all the paperwork. Who filed the report, Mr. Bell? Sergeant Vega asked, though she already knew. Arthur's voice was a whisper. David, my son David. The room was quiet. The legal machinery was already turning. A missing person report, especially for a vulnerable adult, triggers immediate protocols. It creates a legal shadow. In the eyes of the law at that moment, Arthur Bell was potentially a confused old man who needed protection, and David Bell was the concerned relative trying to find him. David had built a narrative firewall. Captain Rinaldi spoke up. The alert I saw, the silver alert, it was based on that report. It said you might be disoriented, a danger to yourself. But you didn't seem disoriented to me, Mr. Bell. You seemed sad. That single observation, from a trained pilot used to assessing situations, changed the vector of the entire investigation. Sergeant Vega shifted her line of questioning. If you were moving to the Philippines, Mr. Bell, do you have the documentation for your visa, the address of where you're staying? Arthur fumbled in his carry-on bag. He produced a folder David had given him. Inside was a printout for a long-stay tourist visa, which is not a residency visa, and a brochure for Sunset Haven Residential Care in Manila. The operations manager, who had experience with immigration issues, scanned it. This isn't a retirement visa. This is a temporary tourist visa. It's valid for 1 month, extendable for another 2 months if you apply in country and meet certain financial requirements. After that, you'd have to leave. Arthur was confused. But David said it was for a year. He said it was permanent. Sergeant Vega took the brochure. Sunset Haven. She did a quick search on her phone. Her face tightened. It's a registered care facility, but it's not a resort. It's a locked memory care unit. The pieces were locking together with a terrible logical clarity. The one-way ticket, the invalid visa, the destination being a locked facility, not a retirement community. The missing person report pre-filed to frame Arthur as a wanderer, making any call for help from the Philippines look like the ramblings of a confused patient. And the money? Sergeant Vega asked the next, inevitable question. Mr. Bell, do you have access to your finances, the money from the sale of your house? Arthur explained about the joint account, the power of attorney. A call was placed to the bank. After verification, the bank representative confirmed the balance and the account status. The $270,000 had been transferred out of the joint account 48 hours earlier. The destination was an account in the Cayman Islands. The transfer was authorized by David Bell under the power of attorney. The account in the Caymans was in David's name only. Arthur Bell, sitting in that sterile airport office, was finally beginning to see the full, horrifying architecture of his son's plan. He wasn't being relocated. He was being disappeared. He was to be rendered a non-person, declared missing, institutionalized in a foreign country under a different name. David had only booked the ticket as Arthur Bell, but facilities can be told anything, and stripped of all his resources. The beauty, the cruelty of the plan was its layers. If Arthur ever managed to contact authorities abroad, the pre-existing missing person report in the US would discredit him. He would be seen as a dementia patient with a fantasy. David would have the money and the perfect alibi of a grieving, concerned son. But David Bell had made one critical miscalculation. He had filed the missing person report too early. In his anxiety to create the legal narrative, he'd filed it the morning of Arthur's flight, wanting it active and in the system. That report generated the silver alert that Captain Rinaldi saw. David assumed no one would connect a generic alert in California to a passenger on an international flight in Los Angeles. He underestimated the vigilance of a pilot. doing his final checks. And he profoundly underestimated the quiet, observant man in seat 12A. Sergeant Vega now had enough for criminal suspicion. This was no longer a welfare check. This was potential elder abuse, financial exploitation, attempted abandonment, and fraud. She contacted the San Francisco Police Department to amend the missing person report to a criminal investigation and to locate David Bell. Meanwhile, airport police placed Arthur in a secure hotel at the airport, with a uniformed officer stationed outside his door for his protection. They froze what little remained in his accounts. They also contacted Adult Protective Services. Back in San Francisco, David Bell was waiting for a different kind of confirmation. He was waiting for the flight tracker to show Philippine Airlines Flight 107 as departed and then over Pacific. Once that plane was in international airspace, his plan was airtight. He refreshed the page repeatedly. The status remained boarding. Then it changed to delayed. A flicker of worry. Delays happen. He called the airline's automated line. It confirmed a delay, citing operational reasons. He paced his condo. An hour passed. The status hadn't changed. He tried calling the customer service number, but wait times were long. His anxiety curdled into panic. Then his phone rang. It wasn't a number he recognized. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text arrived from the same number. David Bell, this is Sergeant Lisa Vega with Los Angeles Airport Police. Please call me back immediately regarding your father, Arthur Bell. The message was a seismic shock. His entire plan, built on layers of deceit, had just hit something solid. He didn't call back. He knew what that meant. They were on to him. He had hours, maybe minutes, before they came to his door. He had the money, but it was in the Caymans, and moving it again would take time and trigger more flags. He was trapped. In the airport hotel, Arthur sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by a silence more profound than any he'd ever known. The officer outside had given him a cell phone to use. He held it in his hand, staring at the blank screen. He had one number memorized, the landline of his old neighbors in Dayton, the Millers. He hadn't spoken to them in months. David had discouraged it. With a deep breath, Arthur dialed. Betty Miller answered on the third ring. Hello. Her voice, familiar and warm, broke the dam. Arthur, the retired history teacher who had lectured on the Civil War and the Great Depression, finally began to cry. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. Arthur, Arthur, is that you? My God, where are you? David said you moved away to some facility, that you were sick and didn't want visitors. And in that moment, Arthur Bell realized the betrayal was even deeper than the ticket or the stolen money. His son had already begun erasing him from the world, telling his oldest friends a cover story to ensure no one would come looking. The narrative firewall had been built on all sides, but Betty Miller was the first thread pulled, and she would not let go. Betty Miller's call to Arthur Bell set off a chain reaction that David Bell could never have calculated. While Arthur wept in an airport hotel, Betty was on the phone with her daughter, a family law attorney in Cleveland. Within an hour, that attorney was on the line with the Los Angeles Airport Police and Adult Protective Services, cutting through red tape with professional efficiency. She connected them to Arthur's longtime family doctor in Dayton, who provided sworn statements refuting the severe cognitive impairment claim in David's missing person report. The narrative firewall was crumbling, but the real break came from an unexpected source: the bank. When the bank representative had initially confirmed the transfer to the Cayman Islands, she'd noted a flag on David Bell's own accounts. While investigating the joint account, she saw a series of rapid, large withdrawals from David's personal and business accounts over the prior 6 months. Over $300,000 moved to offshore entities. This triggered a routine financial crimes review. The bank's security team, now aware of the police investigation, shared their findings. David Bell wasn't just stealing from his father, he was drowning. Sergeant Vega in Los Angeles now had a clearer picture. David's tech startup had failed quietly a year ago. He'd been hiding the failure, using bridge loans and credit to maintain appearances. He was over $1 million in debt, with creditors circling. The $270,000 from his father's house was a lifeline, but not enough. The plan to abandon Arthur wasn't just cruel, it was a desperate financial Hail Mary. By making Arthur disappear into a foreign care system, David could stop the financial drain of potential future care, pocket the house sale, and potentially even collect on Arthur's life insurance policy, which named David as the sole beneficiary. It was a total financial extraction. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, David made his move. He didn't call Sergeant Vega back. Instead, he booked a one-way ticket to Mexico City, leaving in 4 hours. He packed a single bag with passports, cash, and laptops. He was going to run, but the system David had tried to manipulate was now fully arrayed against him. The amended missing person report, now flagged for potential financial crimes and elder abuse, had been shared with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. His passport was tagged. As he approached the security checkpoint at San Francisco International, a CBP officer scanned his passport. The system flashed. 2 uniformed officers gently escorted him away from the line. He was detained, not arrested, for questioning. The police were on their way. Back in Los Angeles, Arthur was meeting with a caseworker from Adult Protective Services, a woman named Gloria. She showed him documents, not just financial records, but emails. David, in his haste, had used his personal email to communicate with the facilitator for the Manila care home. The emails obtained by a police warrant were chilling. David wrote, "He is compliant but forgetful, needs a secure environment, no visitors, will be a private pay, cash up front." The facilitator, a man named Ramos, replied with a price list for different levels of containment. The highest fee was for a wing with no external communication privileges. Arthur was looking at a menu for his own imprisonment. The date on the email was 2 days after Arthur's diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. David had been planning this for over a year. Arthur's grief hardened into something else, a cold, clear anger. He turned to Gloria and Sergeant Vega. "What happens now?" Sergeant Vega explained that David would likely be charged with multiple felonies, financial elder abuse, attempted false imprisonment, fraud, and more. Extraditing him from California to Ohio or to Los Angeles for trial would be a process. But the money in the Cayman Islands, that was more complicated. International recovery could take years, if it happened at all. Then Gloria asked a question that changed the trajectory of everything. "Mr. Bell, you have power of attorney documents signed for David, but do you have an advance healthcare directive or a will?" Arthur nodded. He had a will leaving everything to David and a directive giving David medical power. "We need to revoke those immediately," Gloria said, "and we need to appoint a new agent." Arthur thought of Betty Miller, of her steady kindness, but a more pressing issue loomed. Arthur was technically homeless. His house was sold. His money was gone. He was in a Los Angeles hotel with a police guard. The system meant to protect him was also temporary. This is when the story pivoted from a crime thriller to a societal exposé. Gloria from APS explained the chilling statistics. Over 200,000 cases of elder financial abuse are reported each year in the United States, with estimated losses in the tens of billions. And that's just the reported cases. The most common perpetrator, an adult child. Arthur's case was extreme in its international scope, but the pattern was textbook: isolation, control of finances, manipulation of legal documents, and finally, exploitation. Arthur Bell was one data point in a silent epidemic. But Arthur refused to be just a statistic. With the help of the APS attorney, he held a press conference. Not a loud, dramatic spectacle, but a quiet, dignified statement in the airport police briefing room. He stood beside Sergeant Vega and Captain Rinaldi. He didn't cry. He simply told his story fact by fact. The sold house, the one-way ticket, the locked facility in Manila, the stolen money. He ended by looking directly into the cameras. "My son did this to me. If he could do it to me, he could do it to your parent, your neighbor, your friend. This isn't a family matter, it's a crime, and I am not confused. I am not a burden, I am a victim." The video clip went viral. It wasn't just news, it was a primal fear realized. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured into a fund set up by his old Dayton community, an offer of a pro bono civil attorney to sue David and chase the offshore money. A retired judge in Ohio offered Arthur a small guest house on his property to live in, rent-free, for as long as he needed. The pilot, Captain Rinaldi, became a national hero, featured on morning shows for his vigilance. The story sparked legislative calls for Arthur's law, stricter protocols for vetting overseas senior transfers, and faster intervention on financial power of attorney abuse. And in a jail cell in San Francisco, David Bell watched his father on a small television, clear-eyed and resolute. The man he had written off as a confused, used-up old man was now the calm center of a national storm. David's lawyer told him the DA was considering a plea deal, but the federal government was now looking at the international wire fraud and potential human trafficking-related charges for the attempted abandonment across borders. The consequences were escalating from state to federal, from years to decades. Arthur, however, was focused on a single, tangible goal. With his new attorney, he filed an emergency motion to revoke David's power of attorney and to be restored as the sole owner of his own identity. He also did something David never expected. He changed his will. He left what little he had left, and any future recovered assets, to establish a legal defense fund for other victims of elder financial abuse. He was disinheriting his son not out of spite, but out of principle. The final break was not emotional, but legal. A series of signatures on official documents that severed David Bell from the life he had tried to steal. As Arthur prepared to fly back to Ohio, to his new temporary home and an uncertain future, he was handed a sealed envelope. It was a letter passed through the legal system from David to him. Arthur stood in the terminal, the same terminal where his ordeal had paused days before, and opened it. Inside was a single line, written in David's frantic scrawl: "You were always going to be a burden. I just chose my way out." There was no apology, only a final, twisted justification. Arthur folded the letter, put it in his pocket, and walked toward his gate. He was going home, but he was not the same man who had left. He was a man who had looked into the abyss of his own family and had decided to build a new life from the wreckage. And as the wheels of justice began to turn for David Bell, a much harder question remained. What does a father do when the son he raised becomes the monster he must help put away? The courtroom in San Francisco was nothing like the dramatic scenes on television. It was quiet, procedural, and air-conditioned to the point of being cold. David Bell stood before the judge, flanked by his public defender. He had waived his right to a jury trial, opting for a bench trial in the hope of a more lenient sentence. The evidence was insurmountable. The emails with the facilitator in Manila, the bank records showing the transfer to the Cayman Islands, the testimony of Captain Rinaldi and Sergeant Vega, and the devastatingly clear statements from his own father. David was convicted on all major counts: felony financial elder abuse, attempted false imprisonment, fraud, and perjury for the false missing person report. The federal charges for wire fraud and attempted international parental abandonment were still pending, but the state case alone carried a sentence of 12 to 20 years. The judge, in her remarks, noted the premeditated, heartless nature of the crime and the profound breach of trust. David was sentenced to 15 years in a medium-security prison. He showed no emotion as the bailiffs led him away. He did not look at his father, who sat in the front row of the gallery. Arthur Bell did not feel vindication. He felt a deep, hollow exhaustion. He returned to Ohio, to the small guest house on the retired judge's property. The community of Dayton had welcomed him back as a quiet hero. He spent his days tending a small garden, much like the one he'd left behind. He began volunteering with the local Adult Protective Services office, speaking to groups about the signs of elder financial abuse. The fund established in his name grew, and its first grant helped a 70-year-old widow in Toledo recover her home from a predatory reverse mortgage scheme. Arthur found a purpose in his survival. But the story had one more turn, a final piece of the puzzle that fell into place months after the trial. During the federal investigation into the international aspects of the case, agents tracked the money David had sent to the Cayman Islands. What they found was not just David's theft, but a network. The facilitator in Manila, Mr. Ramos, was part of a larger operation that arranged discreet long-term care for unwanted elderly relatives from wealthy countries. It was a shadowy, legal gray area service that exploited loose immigration and care standards. The $270,000 hadn't just vanished into David's account. A significant portion had been paid as an upfront fee to this network. This discovery led to a joint operation by international law enforcement, resulting in the dismantling of the network and the rescue of several other elderly individuals from similar fates. Arthur's case, by pure chance, had exposed an entire industry built on familial abandonment. The media dubbed it the Bell Effect. Captain Mark Rinaldi received a commendation from the airline and was honored by several elder advocacy groups. He still flies the Los Angeles to Manila route, and he makes a point of walking through the cabin during boarding, his eyes scanning the passengers, a habit born of one moment of extraordinary attention. Sergeant Vega transferred to a specialized unit investigating financial crimes against the elderly. And in the state legislature of Ohio, a bill known as Arthur's Law began its journey through committee. It proposed mandatory waiting periods and judicial review for power of attorney transfers involving seniors, and required airlines to train staff on recognizing signs of coerced or suspicious travel. Arthur, however, was focused on a more personal form of justice. With the help of his pro bono attorney, he filed a civil suit against David for the stolen assets. The judgment was a formality, but it was important to Arthur. He was awarded a multi-million-dollar judgment, which of course he would never collect from a man in prison with no assets, but it was on the record. It was a line in the sand. The money from the house was gone, but Arthur's modest needs were met by his pension, the donations, and the kindness of his community. He lived simply, but he was not alone. One afternoon, a year after the trial, Arthur received a letter. It was from David. He expected more vitriol, more justification. Instead, it was a single typed page. David described the routine of prison, the therapy sessions he was mandated to attend, the books he was reading. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not say he was sorry. What he wrote was this: "In group, they make us talk about the people we hurt. I told them about you. I said you were weak and old, and that you would have been a burden. The guy next to me, he's in for robbing his grandmother. He looked at me and said, 'You're the most pathetic one here. We robbed our family. You tried to erase yours.' I had no answer for that." Arthur read the letter once, then filed it away with the other one. He did not write back. The final chapter of the story is not about punishment, but about legacy. Arthur Bell, the retired history teacher who almost became a footnote in his own son's story of greed, became a living lesson. He speaks at law enforcement trainings, his calm, factual recounting of his ordeal more powerful than any scripted performance. He ends every talk with the same line: "Watch the quiet ones, the ones who are being isolated. The ones whose stories are being rewritten by the people they trust the most. Sometimes, the person you need to save is sitting right across the dinner table." He never bought another house. He says the guest house is enough. He grows tomatoes again, and on the wall above his desk, there is a framed photo. It's not of David or of his late wife Carol. It's a photo of the cockpit of a Philippine Airlines jet sent to him by Captain Rinaldi, signed on the margin by the entire crew of Flight 107. It reads, "To Arthur, thank you for being in seat 12A. We were all paying attention." The system worked, but only because individuals within it chose to see, to question, to act. From a pilot's glance at a news alert to a neighbor's concerned phone call, a chain of attention was built that even the most calculated betrayal could not break. Arthur Bell's story is a map of that chain. It is a reminder that the greatest security against darkness is not a lock or a law, but the willingness to look at a stranger and see a person in need. And sometimes, to look at your own son and see a stranger. As for David Bell, he will be eligible for parole in 10 years. His father does not plan to attend the hearing. The old man in Ohio is too busy living the life his son tried to throw away. He tends his garden, answers letters from other survivors, and on clear nights, he looks up at the sky. He thinks about the plane that never took off, the life that was almost lost, and the unexpected redemption found in a crowded terminal and the kindness of strangers. The journey he was supposed to take ended before it began, but the journey he actually took was the one that saved him. And now, the path forward is his own. So what do we make of Arthur Bell's story? Is it a crime story, a family tragedy, a societal warning? It is all of those things, but at its core, it is a story about attention. The attention a pilot paid to a news alert. The attention a neighbor paid to a missing friend. The attention a police sergeant paid to a confused man in a blazer. In a world built on systems and protocols, it was individual human attention that built a wall against a calculated evil. We live in a time where isolation is easier than ever to engineer, where financial pressure can warp a person's moral compass until a parent looks like a liability instead of a person. Arthur's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How well do we really know the struggles of the people in our own families? When does ambition become predation? And at what point does our duty to protect the vulnerable require us to question even those we love? Arthur Bell did not get his old life back. That was gone, sold off, and stolen. What he built in its place was something different, a life of purpose forged in betrayal. He is not a victim anymore, he is a witness, and his testimony extends beyond a courtroom. It's in every training session he leads, every letter he answers from another scared senior, every tomato plant he tends in his garden, a quiet, stubborn insistence that life goes on after the worst has happened. The legal reforms inspired by his case, the Arthur's Law proposals, they matter, but perhaps the more powerful reform is the one that happens in our own minds. It's the decision to call the friend who's been oddly quiet. It's the choice to question the rushed financial decision. It's the courage to intervene when a story doesn't quite add up. The machinery of abandonment requires silence to function. Arthur Bell's story is a blueprint for breaking that silence. We leave him here in Ohio with his hands in the soil. The man who was almost erased from the earth is now firmly rooted in it. His legacy won't be the fortune he never had, but the lives he helps protect. His revenge on the darkness that tried to claim him is a simple, powerful thing, a life lived well, and a voice that refuses to be silenced. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think of someone in your own life, then do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but it helps us keep telling these essential human stories. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone else is in a seat they don't understand, on a journey they didn't choose. And the only thing standing between them and oblivion might just be someone else paying attention. Thank you for watching.